Well, hello and welcome to our webinar on the Armexa Iris operations platform. I'm Jacob Marsloff, the CEO and co-founder of Armexa, and I'm joined today by my CTO and co-founder, Eric Forner. So we're going to go through some of the details about why we created this, who this is for, and what makes it different than anything else that's in the market today. But before we get into that, I do want to take a second to go through. So before we get started, I did want to take a second to give you some background on who we are, where we came from, and what our experience is. So like I mentioned, my name's Jacob Marsloff. So going back, I don't know, at the beginning of my career, I started off working at Anadarko Petroleum, where actually that's where I met Eric. We were part of a two-person team responsible for all OT security at Anadarko, and that was spanning across 75 different facilities. So we did everything, right? From the strategy, the implementation, the run and maintain, which is going to be very relevant to today's conversation. So we were just on call all the time. After that, left and went to Accenture. So worked for large consulting for quite a few years there and ran a lot of large global projects, specifically in OT security. But after a few years of that, just felt like we wanted to get back to our roots of really being very hands-on and helping asset owners solve problems in OT security. And that's what gave us the motivation to start up Armexa about 3 years ago. Eric?
Hey everyone, Eric Forner. I am the co-founder and CTO over here at Armexa. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Texas. I actually started out as an automation engineer at the beginning of my career, but have been doing OT security for about 14 years now. Started out working for an asset owner myself at Air Products and Chemicals, moved on to Anadarko, and then to Accenture a little bit later on. But really my passion is getting my hands dirty, putting on boots and going out to the field on behalf of our customers.
Awesome. Then I also want to take a second to go through a little bit of the background of the company. So like I mentioned, we started up 3 years ago. So it was just the two of us whenever we started. We're about 30 people today of fully dedicated OT security professionals. And really what we wanted to do and what we are doing today is embody what we're calling an asset owner mentality. And that really comes from the fact that we've been on both sides of the table, right? We've lived and breathed OT security and having to maintain these systems for a long time. And we understand a lot of the challenges that come with it. So our main goal is that for any of our clients, anyone that we work with, we don't want to just deliver a package and say goodbye and good luck, because we all know how that goes, right? We want to make sure that everything that we do is actually achievable and practical for our clients, because we really want to help increase the security of our critical infrastructure all around the world. And briefly, I'm not going to go through every single bullet point, but for sure on the services that we offer, but just to give you a sense, we do everything across the OT security lifecycle. And we have it split up into some main buckets here around governance, assess and plan, design and implement, and run and maintain, as well as all the integration, because there's a lot of technology out there. And so it can get complicated, which actually feeds in pretty well to the run and maintain side. And a lot of the reason that we started up the Iris operations platform. The integration side can be very challenging, and technologies is only as good as the people that you have, right? So that's why we want to help our clients and help everyone really get better at doing the basics and the foundations well inside of OT security. Because it doesn't have to be as complicated as I think some people have made it. So, all right, so let's get started talking about the Iris operations platform, the main event here today. So, first thing I want to go through is some of the background on the reasons why we made this, right? And so one of the biggest points there is around downtime, because I think a lot of folks feel that security is just an insurance policy. You're just buying it just in case something happens, but what's the likelihood and what's the probability of these things happening? But if we take a step back and look at the infrastructure that we're supporting inside of facilities, it's extremely impactful, making sure that every piece part is configured correctly and maintained correctly. Because, for instance, one switch port, if it's misconfigured and somebody either changes a switch port configuration or unplugs something from a switch, can actually cause downtime at a facility. And whenever we're working with these large industrial facilities, they generate a lot of money per hour. And just because you go down for 1 hour doesn't mean you can come back up in an hour, right? So it can take multiple hours and lots of people and coordination to get a facility back up and running. So that's what we want to talk about with the downtime. So yeah, Eric, anything that you want to go through on the or add on to the high cost of downtime?
Sure. Yeah. So when it comes to OT, there's sort of two things. There's the technology, and then how you configure and maintain that technology. And one of the things that we've seen is in working in many different industrial facilities, all around the world, is that a technology can be implemented anywhere in the IT environment or the OT environment. Really, the big difference for OT is how it's designed, configured, and implemented. Like Jacob mentioned, there are certain risks and consequences in an OT environment based on how technology is configured that are unique to OT versus IT. So what we've done as part of Iris is take that mentality of, hey, let's take the best technology, but actually configure it in such a way that it makes sense for OT, and have the services around it for people who understand the criticality of these environments. So going on about why we developed the Iris operations platform, coming from an asset owner space ourselves, is we always had certain challenges that we really didn't have a solution to. And so one of the things that we wanted to do at Armexa developing Iris is take that best of breed technology and the services around it that's actually backed by data, that's actually backed by risk assessments that we have done, hundreds of them, and we have found the biggest risks that are across many OT environments. So what we want to do is take the output of those risk assessments and then put the right technology and processes around it. Like Jacob mentioned, one of the big challenges in OT is if a process goes down or a manufacturing line goes down, it takes a long time to get it back up and running. So one of the things that is a core tenet of ours is being able to recover, essentially building resiliency into the control system. And then we also understand that industrial environments, as much as people like to say that they're static or they don't change, we know they do. They grow, additional trains are built, some things are decommissioned. One of the things that is core to what we're trying to do is make things easy to implement and be scalable, and perhaps most importantly, transparent to the end user, so that it's much easier to do things the secure way and the right way rather than go around security controls and sort of do their own thing. So that's sort of the impetus of the Iris operations platform, and something that we as asset owners would have liked ourselves.
Yeah, I know. Back whenever we were supporting all these things pretty much on a strapped budget, these were a lot of the questions that we had back in the day, right? And a lot of the technology that we would try to deploy out, I mean, it was just introducing more issues or just more visibility without actually helping solve the day-to-day problems that we had, which was the firefighting and all the issues that we had and on the on-call schedule. So that's really a lot of the background about what we wanted to solve. So enough background. I'm sure people want to know what is actually in Iris. So here we have the Iris operations platform, the full package here. As you can see, we have our Iris core, but then we also have these supplemental modules around each one. So we're going to go into detail on each one of these. But the idea really at the end of the day is that we want to help people, one, stop the bleeding inside of OT, and two, show them where to start. Because there's a lot of confusion that we see about what needs to be deployed when, how does it need to be configured, who are the right people to support these systems, because you can't just take necessarily the 100% IT mentality and then go support necessarily like the antivirus on a endpoint inside of OT. There's slight differences there, even if the technology is similar, but those slight differences can have a huge impact with misconfigurations like we were talking about, right? The wrong misconfiguration can bring a facility down, which is a lot different than on the IT side. So let's get started and go into the Iris core.
Sure. So Iris core really is the foundation of what Iris is. And the goal of Iris Core is to be able to introduce some cybersecurity for the most critical systems or the most vulnerable systems in an OT environment in a way that we are not disruptive at all to that environment. Anyone who's been part of a large remediation effort for OT typically involves network segmentation. It can involve lots of IP address changes, lots of firewall rules, which are great and extremely important, but can be extremely disruptive, where you have to schedule downtime, have a capital project to be able to remediate those things. Iris Core tries to get rid of all of that. You can keep what your current architecture is, the systems that you have in place, but what we do is we put the security around them so that they are backed up constantly and able to be recovered, that there's malware protection on it, and that malware protection makes sense for OT assets. Also being able to have some remote access where we, as Armexa, are able to help you with any sort of issues you might have, without spinning up a large, remote access capability. That can go further on down the line, but what Core really is getting you up and running quickly so you have a basis of security that you can build on later.
So let's take a look at some of the features that are included in that, because I know we're talking kind of high level here, but really, what is included inside of Iris Core? I mean, do we need to go through a lengthy remediation project first to get this deployed, or is this something that we can just be plug and play? Like, what is Iris Core?
So Core has three separate offerings. And it really depends kind of where you are in your security journey, which sort of makes the most sense to you. But we start with the actual core. And what that is that involves support from us, 8x5 support, backup and recovery, remote assistance, malware prevention, that sort of stuff. Like I mentioned, that can really get you up and running, particularly for your Windows endpoints, which are the most vulnerable assets typically in an OT environment. They're typically unpatched, like your engineering workstations and HMIs. What this tries to do is to sort of stop the bleeding there. That's Core. Then there is Core Pro. Core Pro adds in patch management. And in OT, there's a concept of QPLs, qualified patch lists, that are approved by your vendor. Could be Honeywell, it could be Rockwell, it can be whoever. But what Core Pro adds is validating and deploying those patches that are validated by the vendor, and then scheduling a time for those patches to be applied. We also have biannual site visits. We understand how important it is for OT to get the boots on the ground, to really meet the people who are running these facilities, whether it's the plant manager, operators, anybody. And what this does is it allows us to go to the site twice a year, gather feedback, be able to do any enhancements, that sort of thing. That really white glove approach goes a long way in OT. It also includes drawings, site as-built drawings that you can use as part of your greenfield projects or brownfield upgrades. Network drawings that you can use and we can use as well from a troubleshooting perspective, so you understand how your environment is set up, where things are, if their IP addresses, stuff like that. Then there's Core Elite. So Core Elite is for organizations that truly want things that are turnkey. It's basically everything with 24/7 support. Of course, we have quarterly on-site visits, so we come at a more regular cadence. You get the network drawings, and we also add in another core capability that we have at Armexa, which is the governance and gap assessments. So one of the foundational things about an OT security is not just the technology and the implementation of it, although that is critically important, but also the governance of it. Are we doing what we say we're going to do? So what Core Elite does is kickstart your OT cybersecurity governance program so that you can show leadership or executives kind of how you're doing and measure it against a gold standard. And if you're on the Iris operations platform, we're the ones who keep that the evergreen gap assessment, so we can see how the program's maturing over the years. So those are the three core offerings that we have.
Yeah, and really the big point, right, of all of these, right, Iris Core and as well as the supplemental modules is that, technology is great and it can really enhance and enable organizations to do more things, but without the right people, without the right knowledge, that technology is not really worth deploying. So that's what we want to help people with is, we've lived this. All the folks on the team have been to many, many field sites, put on the hard hats and steel toes, very familiar with working in industrial environments. So we understand those sensitivities. And that's really the full package, right? Like Eric mentioned, very turnkey, white glove, that's what operations needs. And that's what we want to do for operations, right? Because they're the ones making the money for the business more times than not, and we need to make sure that they're up and running, but doing things securely.
And then from there, we realized that what Iris Core does is really get you up and running quickly, but there are certain things that we have seen working in many industrial environments that organizations really like to have as they're starting to mature their program. So what we have done with the Iris operations platform is add these modules that you can add at your own time, at your own pace, but really helps reduce that risk and then increases the resilience of your operations when it makes sense for you. And there's 4 of them. We'll go through each of them in detail, but the very first one is resilient control, which I think is very unique to Armexa, in that we are able to do the backup, recovery, and change management of your embedded hardware, like PLCs, stuff like that. Very, very OT focused. Secure remote access, which allows us to build a remote access capability, not just for Armexa to come in and help you with issues, but your employees, if they need access to that environment, or contractors, if they need access to that environment. There's resilient infrastructure, which is around making sure that the network infrastructure that services your control system is monitored so that we can proactively solve problems without reactively having to replace switches because we don't know what the issue is, or there may be some missed packets from your HMI that you're getting bad tags. That sort of thing is what we're trying to solve with resilient infrastructure. And the last one is secure conduit. And secure conduit is that border IT/OT firewall. One of those fundamental things that really reduce your risk in OT is that border firewall that controls north-south traffic. And we'll go more into what these entail, but these are the 4 at a high level.
Yeah, so let's go into resilient control a little bit more. Kind of curious, is this something that's just security for security's sake? Does this have other benefits as well? I mean, what is it? What is resilient control?
Yeah, so we all know in OT that the PLCs, the VFDs, the embedded hardware that is running the environment, that's the keys of the kingdom, man. That's it. So if those things get compromised, there is no process anymore. So you can back up your Windows stuff all day, which is extremely important, but what's actually running the plan is the embedded hardware, those PLCs. So what resilient control is a continuous way for us to back up the most common controllers you'll see in North America. So things like Rockwell Automation, Allen Bradley, and Siemens, those sort of vendors. It allows us to do those backups so that if a system integrator comes in and they put in an incorrect configuration, or that PLC dies, all these things have happened before. We have a configuration, a known good, that we can plop that back onto the controller to get you back up and running quickly. In addition to that, it does change management. So again, if there's a system integrator who goes in, who may or may not have an MOC in place, a change is made, you as the asset owner are instantly alerted that there's a change. So that change could be more than likely not malicious, but you just want to know that it exists. And that's really what resilient control is really getting a handle of how your PLCs, VFDs, embedded hardware as a whole are configured in your environment.
Great. So what about secure remote access? Like what kind of problems is this solving? I mean, we run across this all the time. Everybody is asking for remote access. I know if we go back a couple years, right? I mean, it was pretty common to not want remote access inside of OT, but really what we're seeing across the board is that that's not realistic anymore, right? I mean, we all had to go remote work for reasons a couple years ago, and so that has permeated through around the world and even down into industrial environments. So, what kind of things is secure remote access solving? What are the details there?
Yeah, man. So a lot of these facilities can, quite frankly, be, in very far-flung locations. And what organizations had to have done before is if you have an integrator who is very specific to that piece of kit, you would have to fly one of their field engineers on site, which are day rates, their travel, all of that stuff can get extremely expensive. We all know that. So what we have done is introduce a remote access capability so that those third-party vendors or your engineering staff that might be, here in Houston or wherever, can securely access that environment. And what we want to do is to make this easy for these folks to be able to get access, because we all know if we don't make it easy, somebody's going to install, TeamViewer or something else like that that is not monitored, and we don't really know what's going on there. It could have vulnerabilities that we don't know about. What secure remote access for Iris is an easy way to get employees and third parties access to the environment in a way that's monitored, so that we actually see what they're doing. We can tie it to an MOC process so we know that that person is approved. And then we also are able to do something called password injection. So what that means is that a system integrator doesn't need to know the administrator password to your HMIs, your engineering workstation. They need to have a credential for them to get in, but then the system is able to inject the password into the engineering workstation or HMI, so they get access to what they need, but they don't have the administrator password, because we know that typically you might just have one password for everything. And what the secure remote access allows us to do is to give people access to those environments without giving them the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, and really, I mean, want to make sure it's understood, this isn't just for us to get into the environment as Armexa, right? Like this is fully managed to make sure that contractors or your own folks can get in, and it's just you don't have to worry about the configuration, adding all the people, and fielding all those requests, right? Like we want to handle that for you because with each one of these modules, right? Because we know how stringent those requirements can be and how fast those requests can come in. And you don't always get a few days of time heads up before you need to do something, right? You need to act fast because, if things go down, right, it costs a lot of money. So I'm just going to keep underscoring that point.
Yeah, so the next one that we have is the resilient infrastructure module. And so next to, I think the firewall is the issue, I think the network is the issue. Always is that if there's an issue with the HMI communicating with the PLCs or communication to the historian, it's almost always, I think it's a network issue. And honestly, sometimes it is. But what resilient infrastructure does is allow us as Armexa to be part of the troubleshooting, because we will have the knowledge and the access to be able to see how the network infrastructure is doing from a utilization standpoint, from a network saturation standpoint, lost packets, that sort of thing. Is resilient infrastructure allows us to fully manage your OT network so that we can proactively solve problems. And if there is an issue that operations thinks may be a network issue, we'll be there with you to help you troubleshoot that problem. And if it is the network, we'll have the data to be able to fix it. And the last one is our secure conduit module. And like I mentioned, it's if it's not a network issue, it probably is a firewall issue. And managing and configuring a firewall is honestly can be a career into itself. They are easy in theory, that essentially you have a box that keeps the bad things out, but in practice, you have to be very careful about the rule set that you put in there, particularly for OT. You can have some exotic protocols. You may have things that if that data flow is blocked for whatever reason, the facility shuts down. So it's imperative that that rule set is correct, but it's also imperative that that firewall exists. So what Secure Conduit does is has our SMEs at Armexa put in that border firewall that we procure and implement, and we are able to put in the rule set based on the requirements of your facility, and then most importantly is keep it evergreen. We know that the OT environment has new data flows all the time, new products get introduced, there may be some additional telemetry that you need to get out of the OT environment. We as Armexa are there to help you and to be able to understand what that new data flow is and then put it in based on a management of change so that you don't have to worry about the firewall. You can just be assured that you have security between your IT and OT environments. And that's really what Secure Conduit is all about.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times we come across firewalls and we're going through and doing a rationalization or implementation at a brownfield facility, and there's that temporary any allow rule that's been there that was probably only meant to be there for a day or two for troubleshooting that just got forgotten about, right? And so it's just sitting there and letting all the traffic through. So we see a lot of Swiss cheese, which is fine, right? Like those things happen, but they need to be remediated, they need to be fixed, and we want to help do that, right? And make sure that it's done. And like Eric mentioned, it's evergreen because it can be pretty complicated maintaining some of these environments, and need to have the right rule sets in there and a knowledgeable rule set in there to make sure that we're not accidentally introducing risk into the environment.
Totally. So yeah, let's go into just a little bit like, okay, cool. This is the stuff, but like, how does this actually work? How does this get implemented into your environment? Like Jacob mentioned, for OT, in our experience, is that white glove approach. Getting there and talking to operations is absolutely critical. So when you choose to implement Iris, whether it's core or core with some additional modules, you'll get a dedicated account lead and a technical point of contact that you will have throughout the duration. So you have a person that you can call if you have any issues. It's not, putting a ticket into a queue and it'll get, answered wherever. We understand that these environments are extremely critical. So we want to have the support to be able to support you in those sort of environments. So what we do as part of an onboarding is we meet with your team. We try to understand how you work, how your infrastructure is set up, and then understand kind of who's who and who needs to be informed when changes are made. And that always includes a site visit. So we go to the facility, we meet the folks, we get things set up, ready to go. We give them our points of contact. They can put it on a sticky note on the operator board, totally fine. And then we're available to help. And as part of this as well is, we make sure that the data is secure, backed up, and then we validate AV and malware protection before we leave. So you're in a good state before we leave, and then we're available for you remotely. And of course, depending on your core level, we'll be back there biannually or quarterly. As far as dedicated support, again, we are flexible because we understand that OT personnel and OT processes can be different per customer, and that's totally fine. And so we're really here for you. So however you want to do things or however you want to engage, we're flexible with that. And then as well is if you have any questions or anything like that, again, you'll have an account lead for anything from a commercial standpoint. And then from a technical standpoint, you'll have a dedicated account lead, and they have people behind them. So you would call that person, that account lead or that technical lead. They can either solve the problem themselves, or we have a group of people that are dedicated to Iris that can solve the problem with you.
Yeah, and really to add on to that, we do understand these environments, and that's why we want to go to the sites to really understand how that facility is architected, what technology is there, even outside of what we're deploying the control system is, what the day-to-day operations are, and then really integrate into the existing management of change system, right? And so we understand, that we're not going to be making changes in the middle of the night without letting anybody know, right? The folks that are going to be dedicated supporting your facilities are here. We know them. They work at Armexa. They're U.S. based. You will know them as well. These are not going to be just random people that have never worked in an operations environment. They understand it extremely well, and you'll be well aware of the things that are happening in the environment because you can't be too loosey goosey and just firing from the hip inside of these environments. We get that. So that's a lot of what that dedicated support is and what that specific OT background brings.
Totally. Yeah, and then we can go in as well into kind of how is this set up from a commercial standpoint. So we really try to make this as simple as we can, and then really keep that spirit of making it easy and turnkey. So when you get onboarded into the Iris operations platform, we handle the procurement of all of the licenses and all of the hardware that you may need. So you don't have to worry about that. That's all included as part of the fee. There are some minimum device counts, but what we try to do it is based on the organization, not based on the site. And that's just so we kind of get that critical mass, so we're able to support you properly. We also mentioned as far as the core and the modules, you can start with the core, either core pro, or core elite, and then you can add those modules as they make sense to you. Or you can onboard additional assets into core or secure remote access or anything like that whenever it makes sense to you. We just do a reconciliation at the end of the month. So we really try to keep this extremely flexible so it makes the most sense for your business, because the last thing that we want to do is just make this so complicated that nobody wants to use it. So we want to make it easy from a technical standpoint, so your folks and your system integrators are able to utilize the system easily. But from a commercial standpoint, we want to make it easy as well.
All right, so we've talked a lot about kind of the theory and the slides around Iris, but we did want to show you that this is actually real. We have this up and running in clients' environments. So we wanted to show you our demo environment. We're definitely not going to show you client data or anything like that. But right now, we're just going to focus on looking at the core module, specifically around backups and malware prevention. We'll have additional sessions and different webinars in the future to go through the other modules, but wanted to give you a moment to take a look at what this actually looks like in action. So Eric, you want to go through?
Sure. Thanks. So yeah, what this is just the dashboard that we have for Iris Core. You as a customer, you would also have access to this if you'd like. But really what this is just the overall dashboard based on, what our backups look like, how are our backups validated, are there machines with vulnerabilities that you would see over here, any active alerts, and those alerts end up going to our own SIEM so we can correlate them with alerts from other pieces of software, patch status, all that sort of stuff is managed through here. So you can see, we can actually go into a couple of our devices here. You can see that we're doing some tests. So in this case, one of our utility servers has an incident that's detected based on some malware that it may have found. Well, anyone who has seen any of the DLLs that sort of look like this would see that this is actually Rockwell software, and this is why the expertise around this stuff is so important, because some EDR or antivirus systems, as a matter of fact, most of them can miscategorize OT software as malware. So, which is why we do a lot of this sort of testing in our lab to be able to identify a piece of software as safe, stuff like that. So this is part of our incident triage process, and we test OT software here. Another thing that we have is our backup validation. So of course we do backups at a regular cadence, but we also like to do validations of them, because if something happens to your HMI, EWS, app servers, whatever, we want to be confident that those backups are valid. And we go so far as part of our platform is to not only check the checksum to make sure that what is there is actually there, but we also spin up a virtual machine, whether it's a physical machine or virtual machine. What we do is we virtualize it, spin it up within the Iris operations platform that's actually at your site. It does not leave your facility. And then it takes a screenshot to make sure that Windows is booted up properly, that sort of thing. So we're extremely careful about not only backing things up, but making sure that those backups are validated all the way to actually booting up the machine from the backup and testing it there. There's many other things in here as well around things like remote management, stuff like that. But we'll get into a lot of that more in later demonstrations. I just wanted to give you a high level of what Iris Core looks like and kind of our process of how we implement it.
Well, great. No, so gone through a lot of what Iris is, why we built this, what kind of problems it solves, what it isn't, right? How it compares in the industry. Hopefully you see that this is something that is a bit unique and different than what's being offered today inside of OT. So we talked about the Iris Core, the different modules that are in there, and all the different supplemental modules, and how this can really help solve challenges inside of OT. I mean, our main goal is that we don't want to just check the box and say that you have OT security. We want to live with it and make sure that it is maintained appropriately. The right people are looking at things, the configurations are managed and understood, because that's what we care about, right? Is that operations is up and running, that you can go back to having your day job and get your life back, right? You're probably if you're like us, and whenever we were supporting these environments, it was lots of firefighting, to say the least, right? And it's hard to focus on the strategy. So that's what we want to help you with, is getting back to focusing on the long-term strategy and your day-to-day, while we can help handle all of the operations and the run and maintain inside of OT. So anything else you want to add, Eric?
No, really, it's that, we understand that OT cybersecurity is extremely important, and a lot of organizations are starting to go down that path. But it can be hard to know where to start. It may be hard to, like Jacob mentioned, is to understand those, what employees you need to dedicate to it. Is it automation engineer? Is it IT? Those are questions that we asked when we were working for an operator. And what Iris does is it's really meant to just take away those issues. You focus on what you're great at. Let us focus on what we are great at. And then at the end of the day, we have a secure and resilient infrastructure for you.
All right. Well, thanks for joining, everybody. Really appreciate your time today while we walked through Iris. So wanted to open it up for Q&A and go through some questions. So if you haven't had a chance yet, definitely plop some questions into the Q&A tab there, and we'll address some of those. So yeah, we already have some in here. So go ahead and take the first one here. I'll go in order that they were posted. So is this another name for an MSSP? Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's very different from a standard MSSP, at least in our experience working with MSSPs. A lot of the time what you're getting is just you're sending your data to somebody else, and then they just tell you when you have a problem, right? But we know that doesn't really solve the problem necessarily. For the most part, folks know that there are issues in the environment. They need somebody that can actually go in and help and be very hands-on, which is why we're calling this a platform, right? Is that you're getting the OT experience, the people, right, that can go in, go to the sites and actually configure the equipment for you and take care of it so that you don't have to worry about it. Anything you want to add on that, Eric?
No, that about covers it. I'm just looking at the other questions here. Yeah, this is it's a good one. I've got a number of DCS vendors in the environment. Can this still work? The short answer is yes. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, that the DCS implementations can be like engineered systems where you have to be extremely careful about what you put in there, what software you put on it, that sort of thing. We've worked with many of the large DCS vendors out there, the ones that I'm sure you've all heard of. And what we've done is we have sort of looked at the common software that a lot of them use for endpoint security, for backup and recovery, that sort of thing. And we support those as part of the Iris platform. So you can do it one of two ways. One way is that we coordinate with the DCS vendor and their security team, and we do an integration with Iris there, and then we would maintain all of the third-party kit, PLCs, that sort of stuff. Or we can do the entire thing, understanding that we have to be extremely careful about the software that needs to go on those DCS systems.
Right, now someone just come in. So how do I interact with the team, the Iris team? And do I call a specific rep, or is there a ticketing system? So yes, like we mentioned, there is a dedicated person that you would be talking to. You'll know the team, they'll go to the sites, you'll be introduced to them, but there's also fully integrated ticketing so that you're aware of what's going on. You'll have access to those systems, all the data, right? Like this is your data at the end of the day, not ours. So we want you to have access to those reports and what's going on. So that's all included as well inside of Iris. You want to take the last one there that's in there, Eric?
Sure. Yeah, that's the what happens to our data if we use Iris for a year and then decide to move off the platform. So your data is yours. Any of that data that we would collect or that we maintain as part of Iris, that would be things like backups or telemetry data, how the network is set up from an architectural standpoint, that's yours. So if you decide that you want to take it in-house, or you want to move to another vendor, that data is yours, and you'll absolutely get it. That is extremely important to us, is that at the end of the day, it's your facility, you own it. So that's how we view it.
Cool. It looks like that might be it. So definitely, if you have any other questions, feel free to post them in here right now, but also reach out, right? Like we're really excited about this. We're very excited about OT generally. So if you have any thoughts or questions or feedback, we're all ears. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out. Really appreciate everybody joining, and hope you can see why this is different and part of the reason why we made Iris. So excited to hear from you, and thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all.